Thank you. Thank you very much, Jenna. Thank you. Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's session, and it's a privilege, and I'm very happy to be here and to be invited for this presentation. And I'll be talking briefly about English medium instruction EMI plus broader applied linguistics field and overlapping with the higher education policy particularly. And a bit of background on mine. I studied as an international student and domestic student. I have the student experience, and I taught classes where domestic students and international students they were present. So I had a teacher perspective and experience as well. And I designed courses, and then I trained teachers. So I have various perspectives that included working with international students. And therefore, my research, especially since 2014, when I started my research in Oxford University, had a particular focus on student that included international student within the English medium instruction EMI university settings. And I became particularly more interested in those students' experiences and outcomes of that journeys. And today I will be focusing on English medium instruction university settings, English medium instruction field, and the overlapping areas with the research with international students. So to start with, just I think it's always good to have a look at the key concepts and the definitions. And I know that when we look at the international student definition, there is this fuzziness in that. So I'm not going to get into that much. I'm not going to get involved in that discussion. But when we look at the definition of English medium instruction, it's not any more clear there. There is this fuzziness already exists, and these are some definitions available in the literature, and they are formed around certain concepts. And recently, I proposed an updated version of mostly used, one of the most used definitions of EMI to the field, which is EMI can be defined as the use of English, for example, sole use, partial use, code switching, and so on, both by students and content teachers to learn and teach academic subjects other than English itself within EMI settings, regardless of their locale. So this definition has some defining features, which firstly it has the focus on learning and the learner. So I place the learner and learning at the core of the definition, and the second important feature is just regardless of locale. So there is no Anglophone or non-Anglophone country setting division involved in this definition. So I'll try to be as quick and swift as possible. Why English medium instruction is being implemented all around the world. So English medium instruction is teaching academic subjects that other languages are present. Let's say in Turkey, in Brazil, in Saudi Arabia, 80% of students are the local domestic students, and some international students or some students not speaking English in the local language, and they commonly speak English or expect to speak English. Well, why do they offer these programs? So one of the motivations behind that decision is the internationalization of higher education, and like Loomer points out, dominant policy narrative is economic in that internationalization aspect of motivation. And modernization of universities, the status of English in the domain of academic research and publication. So EMI seems to be motivating the boom within the global higher education from these points. If you look at the dominant school of EMI internationally, we see that EMI is seen as non-Anglophone centric. So when we talk about the literature, when we look at the literature, we see that the focus is on non-Anglophone countries because Anglophone countries are not counted as EMI settings. For instance, in Miami, in the United States of America, Miami, where you could see the Spanish being spoken largely, but that dominant school of EMI doesn't see Miami as an EMI setting. Or in the UK, a university with a popular program where you see more than 40%, 50% of students, international students, but they don't consider that setting as an EMI setting. So the second part is the emphasis is on English, on medium instruction. So there is this dominant focus on English, which sees the linear progression from teaching of English as a second language, which goes up to English medium instruction. So this is the applied linguistics standpoint. When you have the dominant focus on this is inevitable. So this standpoint is about how English is taught alongside academic subjects. So clear content and language integrated learning, mostly in K-12, and then English for academic purposes, English for specific purposes, and then English medium instruction. But this is the applied linguistics standpoint. And there's another dominant policymaker available that I'd like to share with you. Academic policymakers commonly assume that academic subjects are, when they are taught in good enough English, but we don't know what is good enough. That will be one of the points that they focus. And for that, training EMI lecturers, teachers, according to when necessary, if necessary, that will be the second step in that line. So the second part in this dominant policymaker view is that student English development will be a sub-outcome. So if you teach calculus in English at the end of the program and at the end of the undergraduate years, students' language proficiency level will improve automatically. This is one of the assumptions made by the policymakers, but we don't have enough research data to support that. And because this view is dominant, for instance, in the UK, many language support programs have been shut down recently. But we have research showing that the more effective language support programs are available for the students, for just international students mostly, the academic learning experiences are better. And again, these dominant views have an impact on students, teachers, and institutions overall. And again, dominant policymaker view just expects implementation of EMI would yield, or bringing more international students into their programs would yield institutional prestige and revenue. The increase in the revenue that is expected, and that's how it's seen. And a dedicated institutional EMI policy document is not needed, apparently, because there is no university in the world, Anglophone, non-Anglophone countries, regardless, no university has a dedicated English medium instruction policy in place. There are regulations, teacher recruitment, student recruitment, but there is no those regulation documents are not policy documents. They cannot be treated as such. So this is another point to remember. And a quick anecdote from our recent webinar from Italy. One critical theme emerged in this webinar that mixing of domestic and international students in Italy is problematic. And international students, as others, with adaptation problems or seen as economic units, just being notified by Mittelmeier et al. That were recently. So it is in line with that observation from the research of international students. And from a policy maker and applied linguistics view, if domestic and international students speak good English, whatever it is, then they can mix naturally. So that shouldn't be a problem. But we know that it cannot be limited to that. And I'd like to share my response to one of the questions. Although the language was in Italian, I noticed that comment on the comment box, chat box, and this was my response in English. And they were suggesting that, oh, we should train EMI lecturers so that they can apply different pedagogical techniques to mix international students and domestic students. So that resonates with the policymaker view and applied linguistics view already. But EMI is not merely a pedagogical technique to be employed in a lecture room, and seeing EMI from this narrow perspective actually drastically understate its broader sociolinguistic, institutional, and ideological implications. And EMI is a policy choice, a cultural practice, should be seen, I argue, and often a political act, which affects that ripple well beyond the boundaries of any individual classroom in any university. In short, it's not about mixing students. You cannot just focus on how you use the pedagogical techniques to mix students, but when we think about English medium instruction, it should be more about the structures that determine who gets mixed, how, and to what end. So that critical perspective is needed more and more in the dominant view of EMI. So I think we have overlapping areas with research with international students and a newer, more critical version of EMI in that area. So I believe that we share that critical overlapping area. And when I look at research in EMI, we see that it is being predominantly focused on problem identification, trends, and particularly English language issues, pedagogical challenges, and stakeholder perceptions. So the perception studies been dominating EMI literature, research literature. And Mittelmeier et al.'s recent publication, I noted that systemic limitations in the scholarship, including stereotyping, deficit framing, and methodological dehumanization. So there are areas where research becomes more in number, but not having enough depth. So EMI research is methodology driven and has long been under theorized, borrowing methodologies from second language acquisition theories mostly. And this approach is criticized by Tourmala's work, just an accumulation of empirically rich but theoretically improvised studies that contribute to information noise rather than knowledge, creating knowledge. So I think in that area, the research area and the depth of the research, we have overlapping areas too. I critique this prevalent toolbox approach in EMI research, where methodologies are borrowed from other disciplines without careful consideration of theoretical foundations. And I argue that methodology should involve deliberate alignment between theory, research questions, and methods. I think this is an area that could help the field of EMI just gain depth in terms of research. And this brings us to the critical EMI area and higher education context, as Philipson argues convincingly, they are not ideologically sterile. Higher education settings are prime sites for global capitalism and its neoliberal ideologies, which seek dominance over competing political and economic powers. So with critical EMI perspective, that observation becomes clear for the observer. And adopting the critical lenses lent by critical social theory that I opt for, and critical EMI, seeks to analyze and understand the context and debates around EMI in higher education, proposing a better way forward by challenging global capitalism's political and economic power structures and their neoliberal policies and practices like internationalization, global mobility, English-only policies, both locally and globally. So critical EMI must adopt a problem-solving approach because pointing out the problematic part can continue just forever. So yes, we are pointing out the problem, but what we are offering instead. So by questioning dominant ideologies and what is often taken for granted, critical EMI can better identify problematic decisions and practices by policymakers and the other relevant university stakeholders. This is the area, this is the standpoint that I've been developing my critical EMI perspective. And critical EMI and internationalization actually, the concept could gain a broader view. And I'd like to share this with you. For instance, you may agree that Knight's definition of internationalization is widely cited. And sorry. Okay, can I? All right. Internationalization as integration of international, intercultural, or global dimensions into higher education, presenting it as ideologically neutral, as Buchner et al. Argues, largely depoliticized and dehistoricized. So I think we need, the fields need a more critical view on the concept of internationalization. And that, because that view often advances the values of global capitalism and as positive ideals, including global citizenship, transnational identity, and intercultural competencies, while pushing universities into competition for resources and stuff, so creating that competitive arena for them. And higher education, I think, I argue strongly that is not a neutral site, but a battleground where economic and political powers vie for dominance, shaping the trajectory of EMI. So Philipson's argument on this just been very, very useful. And in this context, internationalization increasingly responds to the market forces rather than educational progress exacerbating social stratification and inequality. So that critical EMI view is needed to be able to propose a new way forward. And internationalization is a politically motivated process that deepens inequalities. So if we're going to focus on that, if we're going to focus on teachers, students, and the context of higher education, I think critical view just will help us have a clearer understanding of what is really happening, so that we could make informed decisions. And EMI policy, in the non-existence of it, the dominant essentialist orthodoxy of development, a concept that emerged post-World War II, frames universities as vehicles for producing human capital, driven by the need for international economic growth. Back in 1950s, this view just dominated the global higher education as well. And language policies emerged as a discursive outcome of post-World War II essentialist development orthodoxy, which regards multilingualism as a barrier to economic and social progress. So again, 1950s, multilingualism seen as a threat, and they offered something instead. So we need to better understand why this happened and whether this has been happening or not. And in this context, at the macro level, language policies seek to regulate which languages would be used in specific domains, such as commerce and education, and as a mechanism for consolidating economic power and shaping national development within a capitalist framework and within a global capitalist framework. So it is not only regional, it's actually aligning with the global other economic context as well. And this is how I define EMI policy. Yes, there seems to be an EMI policy, but it seems like a shadow EMI policy. Everybody sort of aware of it, but not really putting into a document saying why they are opting for one language policy rather than promoting multilingual opportunities within university settings. So another point, I'll be very quick in here, EMI quality. I argue that it is the most assumed quality concept in the quality history. So even I love this image. I took that photograph just back in 2020, I guess. And France is promoting French higher education to attract international students, saying that in France, 1,300 programs are taught in English. Why do they do that? Because they want to bring international students into France for various reasons. And from the marketing perspective, what they are offering should be of higher quality. So how do they define quality? There wasn't any line of quality definition for EMI. So in that area, I offered one quality definition from my critical EMI perspective. So I defined it as the level of excellence at which the institutional EMI policy, therefore they should have an EMI policy in place, is reflected in institutional practices, for example, pedagogies, instructional materials, linguistic landscape, and so on, learning outcomes, and that's not enough. It should be also within the alumni performance. So international students, let's say, are they getting the best out of their experience in the business world when they go into the job market? And based on these views, I present a political normative argument addressing these gaps. And I present a fundamentally political normative argument that not only prescribes how things ought to be based on ethical and theoretical principles, but critically interrogating political systems and ideologies. And this includes advocating for policy reforms, challenging power structures, and questioning societal norms, with a particular critique of global capitalism and neoliberalism in higher education. Another anecdote might be one of the reviewers that I submitted my manuscript to a journal, and one of the reviewers read that part of my manuscript saying that you are seeing global capitalism and neoliberalism as a pervasive evil. So I was critiqued for that approach, and my response was very short and clear. Yes, they are pervasive, just evils, as far as I'm concerned. I'm not going to get into a lengthy discussion in my manuscript, just sparing 500, 1,000 words, trying to prove that they are not, or giving the other side of the story. So in this context, I advocate for the professionalization of EMI at the university level, and the normative dimension of my argument both critiques the status quo across policy practice and research, and advocates for professionalization as a means to enhance the efficacy of teaching and learning, offering a solution-oriented approach to EMI development in higher education. In doing that, I present this framework, EMI professionalization framework, a more equitable and effective way forward. So, yes, we critiqued, I critique, and I from a critical EMI standpoint, I see things how they should be, and this is the model that I offer. And EMI policy, EMI certification, EMI performance are the three iterative stages of this framework, but this framework is overarched by three critical concepts, or these three critical pillars just carry the framework. The first one is English as an international language, multilingualism, and the third one is universities as sites for liberation. Concept of EMI professionalization is structured through Fritzon's definition of professional, Ivet's recommendations for initiating professionalism, and Solbrecht and Englund's concepts of professional responsibility and accountability. I'm not going to get into that discussion here, but I'm going to share with you how I interpreted those critical concepts into my framework. The professionalization of EMI I define as the systemic process through which content teachers acquire the status of EMI professionals, supported by formal governance and accountability within higher education institutions. And EMI professionals are academic content teachers and managers who hold certified EMI competencies, enabling them to undertake teaching and managerial roles. And Mustafa Akıncıoğlu and Han back in 2020, we defined EMI competencies as the expert knowledge, understanding, and skills needed to effectively teach academic subjects via EMI. One of the critical pillars of EMI framework, the dominant essentialist orthodoxy of development concept, as I shared, just emerged in post-World War II, so frames universities as vehicles for producing human capital, driven by the need for international economic growth. This view is rooted in human capital theory that posits that investing in universities directly correlates with economic progress, as evidenced by return on investment models. So when we look at universities, I argue that we see more and more that university enterprise becoming more corporate-like entities, and they are run by CEOs, CFOs. So this discourse is becoming more and more dominant. So there's a background for it, and today what we are seeing is just not happened during the last few years. Actually, it has a historical background. That's my argument. A non-essentialist view of development, guided by Freire's liberation approach to education, universities should be seen as sites for empowerment and human development rather than mere instruments of economic growth and marketization. So there are views of universities, academia. So I argue that the stakeholders should be well aware of what the competing views of universities and institutions. So that then we could just make more informed choices and decisions. In this perspective, universities become sites where individuals, students, and teachers can realize their full potential, not merely as economic actors, but as empowered citizens capable of social and political emancipation. So I don't agree with the global capitalist view and human capital theory view that universities should be mass producing the human resources shaped by the market needs locally and globally. Universities should be somewhere else where freedom of individuals, students and teachers alike, are just enabled and empowered. And the second pillar is multilingual approach. Multilingualism serves as critical lenses through which multiple languages beyond English can be harnessed in EMI classroom. So although the uh, essentialist orthodoxy of development sees multilingualism as a threat, I don't agree with that view because I see the university from Freire's perspectives, lenses. EMI content teachers can view languages as multilingual, multisemiotic, multisensory, and multimodal resources, fostering culturally sustainable learning environments where creative forms of knowledge and expression flourish. So more languages, multiple languages can be resourceful rather than a threat. This approach challenges the English-only doctrine that neoliberalism often promotes, enabling a more inclusive, culturally responsive pedagogy. And the last pillar, the third pillar, is English as an international language. And Kanagaraja's concept, English as an international language, one that acknowledges the varieties of English and other languages present in multilingual EMI classrooms. So when we talk about English in multilingual EMI classrooms, there is not one type of English, all types are welcome. So the key concept is international language is chosen as English, and all varieties, all accents or all different approaches could be accepted. And by embracing these varieties, EMI classrooms become dynamic spaces where linguistic norms are co-constructed through interaction among students and teachers, reflecting the diversity of complexity of language use in global higher education. And going back to the framework, this framework needs research data, and improvement. This is a guiding frame. This is theory-based, critical EMI-based guiding framework suggested for the universities, both in Anglophone and non-Anglophone contexts, so that they have a particular focus on students, domestic students, international students, and teachers, English teachers, content teachers, and all the other relevant stakeholders. So thank you very much for your patience, and I'm going to stop my presentation here.
Thank you so much. I'll just end our recording here. So thank you if you joined us online.